pluralist coalition of the forces of capitalism, or plutocracy, with the forces of democracy in American politics is the constant companionship of the expanding wilderness frontier. Williams thus stands the Turner frontier on its head, correcting it. I add that another incognate effect of the frontier in American economic development was to preserve the entrepreneurial option long after the arrival of the vast monopoly structures which tend to consume entrepreneurs. In the states whose political economic histories Marx studied, for example, the frontier was never the factor that it was in America, except as America itself was Europe's Wild West. The rugged individualist self-made rich man, the autonomous man of power, the wildcatter, began to drop out of sight, to lose presence as individual, type, and class with the rise of the current-day computer-centered monopoly corporate formations. The tycoon entrepreneur is, of course, disappearing as a type in America, too, at least as a political force in national life. The Hughes empire, at last, has been corporatized. Old Man Hunt is dead. His sons are bringing Harvard Business School rational bureaucracy to the operation. But that only makes it all the more curious that political power continue to emanate from the type and the person, the image and the reality, the ghost, perhaps, of a creature like Hughes as late as the second victorious presidential campaign of Nixon. Why should the cowboy tycoon have persisted so long as a political force, competent to struggle against the biggest banking cartels for control of the levers of national power? As others have argued, the frontier was a reprieve for democracy. We may note here that it was also a reprieve for capitalism as well, whose internal conflicts were constantly being financed off an endless seeming input of vast stretches of natural riches, having no origin in capitalist production. All that was needed was for the settlers to accept the genocidal elimination of the native population, and a great deal became possible, a great deal. The Purple Mountains, the fruited plains, and generation after generation of American whites were able to accept that program. The Indian Wars won the West. The railroad and highways were laid. The country was resettled by a new race, a new nation. The energies of expansion consumed the continent in about 2 centuries, pushing on to Hawaii and Alaska. There's no way to calculate the impact of that constant territorial expansion on the development of American institutions. There is no way to imagine those institutions apart from the environment created by that expansion. It is a matter our standard national hagiography paints out of the picture, though we make much of the populist saga aspect of the pioneering, never, quote, conquering of the West. How can we congratulate our national performance for its general democracy and constitutionalism without taking into account the background of that constant expansion? We do not teach our children that we are Democrats in order to expand forever and Republicans on condition of an unfrozen western boundary with unclaimed wilderness. To the extent that the American miracle of pluralism exists at all, we still do not know how miraculous it would be in the absence of an expanding frontier, its constant companion till the time of the Chinese Revolution. And I mean, I think he's right that it casts like a very long shadow. He also says that it's like now that when he says some nice things about China, basically that like the success and then successful defense from 1950 to 1975 of the Asian revolutionary nationalist campaigns against further Western dominance in Asia, China, Korea, Vietnam, means that all this has changed. What was once true about the space to the west of America is no longer true and will never be true again. There will never be a time again when the white adventurer may peer over his western horizon at an Asia helplessly plunged in social disorganization. In terms of their social power to operate as a unified people and in the assimilation of technology, the Chinese people are, since 1950, a self-modernizing people, not colonials anymore. And instead of a Wild West, Americans now have a mature common boundary with other moderns like ourselves. Not savages, not redskins, not reds, only modern people like ourselves in a single modern world. This is new for us, a new experience.
This is very interesting in light of like post 9/11.
It really is. Like if only that were still true. They managed to turn the clock back on that, I guess. Mm-hmm, so they managed to like revitalize it. I think that was
wishful thinking on his part.
I think it was. And also this is written like probably right before Mao died. So he was referring to Maoist China and their achievements before Big Boy Deng came in and did what he did. And also, the idea that, I mean, I guess in a way he is still correct about all 3 of the countries, Vietnam, Korea, and China. that none of them have, like, I would even say China. It's one thing to say China has like adopted a path of like collaboration and revisionism and capitalism, whatever. But like, I don't think the U.S. necessarily like beat China or like turned it into a vassal state or whatever, or destroyed it. Like, China still exists as like an independent polity, if you will. And America has been forced to like trade with them instead of colonizing them, basically. Like, it's better than nothing, but and then you have like Vietnam, who we also trade with, even though we failed to like, you know, destroy their revolution. And then Korea, we just got BTFO'd and they took the pill low. They're never giving it back, and we just like have to suck it. Which is kind of interesting that Trump, the cowboy president, like buddied up to Kim Jong-un. I'm not sure how that fits into the paradigm, but who knows? It's not like you get a cowboy playbook if you get elected.
No, I think that
it could have been some cowboy entryism going on.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's some, again, like, I don't feel like these, like, you know, precisely map onto everyone. I think that, you know, Bush, HW, that is, like, is someone who kind of, like, confounds the classification, like, fully.
Yeah,
but I think
he's
that
like a daywalker.
You know, in a true dialectic, you know, there's always influence between the two sides. They're not, like, sort of starkly mutually exclusive. But I think, like, just before the portion you read is something interesting that's relevant, like a longer sort of quote from Quigley that's sort of relevant to what we were talking about earlier, where he kind of, you know, he talks about in a footnote some of the Civil War stuff, but also, like, his sort of more granular paradigm of the Yankee-Cowboy dynamic in his own current context. So he says, Quigley is the author of a huge book about the contemporary world, Tragedy and Hope, you know, to which I will return in Chapter 2. I begin my debt to Quigley here by borrowing the following observation from his summary. Noting that since 1950, a revolutionary change has been occurring in American politics, Quigley says this transformation involves, quote, a disintegration of the middle class and a corresponding increase in significance by the petty bourgeoisie, at the same time that economic influence of the older Wall Street financial groups has been weakening and been challenged by new wealth springing up outside the eastern cities, notably in the Southwest and Far West. He continues, these new sources of wealth have been based very largely on government action and government spending, but have nonetheless adopted a petty bourgeois outlook rather than the semi-aristocratic outlook that pervades the Eastern establishment. This new wealth, based on petroleum, natural gas, ruthless exploitation of natural resources, the aviation industry, military bases in the South and West, and finally on space with all its attendant activities. This is very interesting, you know, in light of what we see, like now, you know, you mentioned Elon Musk.
Totally.
Has centered in Texas and Southern California. Its existence for the first time made it possible for the petty bourgeois outlook to make itself felt in the political nomination process instead of in the unrewarding effort to influence politics by voting for a Republican candidate nominated under the Eastern establishment influence. By the 1964 election, the major political issue in the country was a financial struggle behind the scenes between the old wealth, civilizing cultures and its foundations, and the new wealth, virile and uninformed, arising from the flowing profits of government-dependent corporations in the Southwest and the West. So
I thought that was very interesting to point out the massive like state subsidy via the defense industry of like these entire regions, really. Like Texas and Southern California, that's very, you know, Pynchon kind of territory there of like Orange County and Lockheed and Hughes and like NASA and all these, you know, Huntsville, Alabama and Florida. And yeah, also like it does, I mean, I don't know, like you think that kind of, that shouts like Elon Musk to you?
Well, you know, thinking about like the interest in space and how that's, you know, moved to, he's kind of like a huge person involved in space now. I mean, it kind of like moved solely to the private sector for a while, but I think that he's like very much integrated with you know, public funding.
He's like largely bankrolled, I think, off like DoD contracts to launch satellites into space and things like that. So that's kind of still his bread and butter. Like you can't really separate these guys from, it's like, you know, Amazon running the CIA's like cloud computing, you know, service and things like that.
Yeah, so the mention of integrated. Like space, you know, especially, I think
another frontier.
Yeah, exactly. And he even makes that comparison. But I think, he represents like the true like cowboyification or the hypertrophized cowboyification of space. You know, and he really is like a true space cowboy in a way, like with this like, you know, naive attitude, like, you know, towards the whole, like, I saw some thing on Twitter of like all this like debris like scattered or like all over, like, you know, someone's, you know, outside where they lived or something, like, you know, it was like a road, but also like a habitat, you know, for animals, and there's just like all this like, you know, like junk from like his busted up rocket or whatever, just like, you know, strewn everywhere, and like people in the you know, like the original tweet was saying something like, you know, oh, thanks for like, you know, blocking the road and like destroying all these animals, like, you know, habitats, and the people in the comments were like, he has done more to like reach the human potential of space, you know, he's turning us green, and you know, it's like, and people are like, well, how do the rockets help fight global warming? And they're like, well, they don't, but it's just important. It's just important to go to space because of like dreams and imagination, escape. You know. Yeah, exactly.
They just all want to go to Mars in a bucket and live.
They want to go to Mars in a bucket and live on the red planet and worship Shaitan. But anyway,
anyways,
he does say, you know, in a footnote, he notes like, you know, that this is like a new configuration, but that there always is a power struggle theory of some kind from the beginning, and there's always been a split at the top. He mentions the uses of anti-slavery, which is, you know, I guess George M. Frederickson reviewed it, or he wrote a review entitled that of David Bryan Davis's book, The Problem of Slavery, and, you know, the summary of Davis's book via Frederickson, via Oglesby, is the cost of nation of the United States was not merely a sectional compromise, but also a compact between two distinct elites, a northern capitalist class that increasingly recognized the advantages of a free labor system, and a southern planter class already implicitly committed to the preservation and extension of slavery. Hence, the United States seemingly emerged from its revolutionary period without a national ruling class. It was, in fact, a federation of two regional ruling classes. So that's the parallel that he makes, although, like, not necessarily drawing, like, a genealogical link between, you know, the cowboys and the slave elites, you know. It's, like, it's still the same fragmentation of the ruling class.
It's interesting. In a certain kind of way, it's like the Southern elites, I mean, they weren't entirely vanquished, but they were they were definitely taken down a notch and then forced to like kind of reorient to a new system. And in a way, the Western by the early 20th century, really like the second most powerful faction, which was kind of had overlap with the older Southern planter elites, but was like not exactly the same. Was the Western tycoons, and definitely Oglesby kind of focuses more on it's like the Southwestern and the Northeastern are kind of and then, you know, in the middle of the country maybe it's a little more fluid or whatever, but those are the two most powerful blocks. And so it wasn't a direct line per se from, I don't know, defense contractor, like real estate tycoons in, you know, Southern California, like coming straight from the postbellum South or whatever. A lot of times they were just like primitive accumulators or con men, like John D. Rockefeller's dad, or, you know, just like a bunch of Daniel Plainviews coming out there who, you know, got that first mover's advantage, right, or the early adopter advantage, because that's really if you want to like hop in the fast lane and get a lot of power in this capitalist system very fast, you find a new untapped market where you could like primitively accumulate before anybody else gets there. It's just like if you bought 10,000 Bitcoin in 2010, like you would be like a billionaire now. You know, it's like that kind of thing. But they're always trying to like come up with and I'm sure the same thing applies for space. It applied for the internet, like electronics, et cetera, and certainly for like land, real estate in general. But yeah.
For access to the full-length episode, subscribe to the Hour of Frequency at patreon.com/subliminaljihad.
We found that buckle in a pawn shop. Can't two-step across this floor. Them boots ain't ever seen the mud. Can't be what you're looking for. He's got a half-ass smile and fake southern drawl. He's dressed up like the Marlboro Man. He's never backed in a box, dropped in a shoot, and he's never rode for a brand. 'Cause he ain't a cowboy, he ain't a plowboy, he's just a city boy in disguise. He's never drove a tractor. Maybe that's the kind of man you're after. And sore puncher and a buckle I won, sure to break your heart one day.